Alrighty, what is up, friends and comrades? Welcome to another program. It's been a little bit over a week since I last got to speak with you all. I had a much needed 1 week vacation, and now I'm back ready to rock and roll and talk about philosophy, politics, all the sorts of things we usually talk in our programs. Today, we're going to speak about some announcements related to the party, the Midwestern Marx Institute, and other stuff as well. We are going to speak about the current state of the American empire, the crisis of legitimacy that we have seen ensued in the last couple of years, the censorship, what censorship itself means, what it symbolizes when a state begins to crack down on certain voices, while simultaneously sustaining the veneer of a commitment to free speech. We'll also be talking about Venezuela and the current stage of the opposition and the reaction to some of the crimes and criminality of the opposition at large. And then we'll be discussing my recent article critiquing the false binary between a degrowth communist conception, which holds that you can't have economic growth and prosperity without destroying the planet, and the other side of it, which holds that the necessity, of course, is degrowth. The choices between growth and destruction or degrowth. I'm calling that a false dichotomy and postulating that, of course, we can have a dialectical synthesis as China has done. Sublate this false, spurious dialectic and posit something like a sustainable growth. Only socialism can provide for that. So we'll speak about that when the time comes. But without further ado, let's get into our new version of our introduction. I hope you guys like it. Thanks, by the way, to Jesus Motorcycle for this new Midwestern Marx Institute introduction.
High Sheriff Hazard is a hard man to be. High Sheriff is his only plan. He digs through pockets, takes what he can, for he's High Sheriff Hazard. He caught me one evening, and here's what he said: "You look like a Russian, you look like a red, and if you're fond of your skin and your head, beware the High Sheriff of Hazard."
Alrighty, man, that fucking got me going. Shout out again to Jesus Motorcycle for that beautiful new and improved Midwestern Marx introduction. I hope you're all doing well. I thank you all for being here with me. I want to mention before we start something that has to always be mentioned. Do you guys think that the algorithm lords, those that design the structures and the tech logics that decide who gets to see what, when, how much of it, do you think they're going to be pumping out communist streams and broadcasts such as these to the masses at large? Do you think they're going to be putting these streams on the radar of regular working people? Tell me in the chat. Are they going to be sharing these streams whenever we come out and do it to regular people? No, of course not. And how do we defeat that informational blockade that keeps our information only being seen by the same group of people? How do we avoid insularity, which is the greatest enemy of the communists? We avoid it by sharing it. You guys cannot be just passive observers of these streams, especially those of you that are members of the great American Communist Party. You guys have to share these streams. When these streams pop up, you send them to your neighbors, you send them to your coworkers, you put it on your feed for regular people following you to see. And you do it not just with our streams. We're just a part, a component in a larger movement. You do it with the streams of all of us waging the same fight and throttled in very similar ways by the algorithm lords. Go ahead and do it whenever you see Haz's stream. Go ahead and do it when you see our friends at RBN's stream. By the way, shout out to Zoya, who came in and Noah's talk show host when he brings people in. Call-in show, that's what I meant to say. Do it with Jackson. I know he's big on Twitter and Rumble, but nonetheless, do it. It's an imperative that we get this information out there. We do absolutely nothing if we're right, if we have all the right ideas, if we have all the right knowledge about the world, if we're able to consistently pass good knowledge about the world, good opinions. We do absolutely nothing getting at the truth and then keeping it for ourselves. It's in many ways an evangelical task that the communist has ahead of them. We can't hoard the truth for us. We can't hoard knowledge for us. We have to share it around, especially to regular working class people and those folks in our communities. So that's your homework for all of you watching, not just those that are watching live, those that are watching afterwards. Your homework is to share this stream with someone who doesn't already watch us. That is how we win. If you're serious about socialism, if you're serious about the class struggle, and if you're already watching this stream, which means you find something valuable in it, why the hell not share it with the people that need to hear it most? With regular working class people and people who are in that interregnum that realize something is wrong and don't know why things are wrong or how to move forward. That's the sort of clarity we seek to provide here. And that I know my comrades in fraternal organizations seek to provide. Thank you so much, Ruthless Criticism, for the $10 super chat. Hey, bro, what's your thought on the idea that Marxist morality leads to veganism? I don't know. Everyone can have the sort of dietary rules of life that they desire. I'm not going to judge anyone for not eating something or for eating something. I myself, I did veganism for many years. I'm not currently a vegan. So Eddie was spreading false information a while back. I'm not currently a vegan. So I was a vegetarian for a while, and now I eat fish as well. So I guess that's a pescatarian. I'm en route to perhaps going back to being a carnivore. I don't know. I have no idea. At the moment, I think the suffering we have to prioritize is human suffering. And when that's solved, then we have our nice communism. We can start thinking, I think, much more systematically about other forms of animal suffering. That's my honest opinion. But thank you so much for the $10 super chat. Thank you, El Jimenez, who mentioned they were a new viewer earlier in the comment section. Thank you so much for the $5 super sticker. This is a people's funded institute. We don't have no Soros money behind us. We don't have no progressive billionaires throwing us money in order to survive. So we survive off of our hard work and these programs. So we very much appreciate when you, our working class listener, is able to contribute something for our work. Okay, so a few updates. I am opening up the sign up to a new class. I am finishing this Thursday, my Marxist philosophy class. And now you can sign up for my next class. It's a seminar, a course on the history of Western philosophy. Why read? Why do you have to know about philosophy, you ask? Well, let me bring up a quote from none other than Vladimir Lenin, who said that it would mean falling into a grave error for you to try to draw the conclusion that one can become a communist without assimilating the wealth of knowledge amassed by mankind. So, central to being a communist is not just memorizing communist slogans, reading communist Marxist theory. Central to being a communist is being deep down with the masses at the level of praxis. And at the intellectual level, it means also drinking from the fountain of knowledge that has been produced by mankind, by humanity over millenniums. And what I try to do here is provide the student with an opportunity to do just that, at least in the context of the history of Western philosophy, which is the ideological background upon which Marxism, of course, I think, in my view, represents a culmination point. Marxism is, for me, the highest level, the highest moment that the history of philosophy has been able to achieve. Marxism, for me, is through and through a philosophy before all else. So if you're interested in that, you can now sign up. It's an 8-week course, which means is the equivalent of half of university semester. It's $40. You can donate more if you want me to have some extra cash in my pocket to get a coffee or something. But it's the equivalent of $5 a class. The classes are 2 to 3 hours. All of the readings are provided. So if you're interested, this is something that I would highly recommend. And you get the recording. So if there's 1 or 2 days that you can't make it, you're able to see the recording. So there's no loss. So let me give you all the link for that now in the chat. It's the equivalent of $5 a week. So it's like buying me a coffee for teaching you about the history of philosophy. All right. Yeah, I guess I meant omnivore, not carnivore. All right. Let's talk a little bit about ACP, the American Communist Party, for which I serve as a Secretary of Education. A lot of stuff has been done. This is a party that is driven by results, and results are being had already. We have been seeing people all over the country cleaning their communities, areas that have been forgotten about by the local government, by the state government. And these are areas that represent public spaces that working class people, when they're not at work, they go to in order to enjoy some time with their family, some leisure time. And if these spaces are corrupted, if these spaces are made ugly with trash, it affects the lives of working class people. So part of serving our community, our party holds, is this initiative to clean up recreational areas. So here we see ACP New York removing hazardous waste from Coney Island. Again, we're serving our community in the areas where the local government doesn't. Here we saw a week ago, 13 new ACP chapters approved. Similar news, 5 new chapters approved, 13 in total. We'll have a similar news for you all pretty soon. A lot of new chapters have been processed in the last week and a half. ACP Texas, shout out to ACP Texas, Houston. So shout out to ACP Texas. Removing hazardous waste from Brownwood Park. Again, serving our communities, it's absolutely essential. Buffalo, New York. Shout out to the comrades in Buffalo, New York. Went to Martin Luther King Jr. Park to clean up neglected areas. So, of course, acting in the spirit of service for the community, for the poor, for working class people, which drove the great MLK Jr. Here we have comrades from British Columbia cleaning up some of the poorest neighborhoods in Canada. This picture is impressive. This is from our comrades in the Bay Area. Look at how they left this area. Look at the difference. Look at the before and after. This is what I'm talking about. These are neighborhoods that poor working class people have to pass by. And do you feel better passing by a neighborhood that looks like this, like the before image, or one that looks like the after image? Working people take notice of this. Working people take notice of this. And all of these comrades, I'm sure they've been asked quite a few times that, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And the answer is simple. We're communists. We're here to serve the American people, the American working class and poor and working class people around the world. So these before and after pictures are beautiful. For those listening from the ACP, make sure that when you do your cleanups, do it like this. This is a great job done by the Bay Area chapter of the ACP California. If you don't do before and after pictures, it's hard to see the transformation that you have brought to the community. So make sure in the future, for those that are on these cleaning brigades, that you do before and after pictures. I think that's good to show contrast. All right, here we have ACP Ontario. We, of course, consider our comrades up in the north in Canada to be part of the same civilizational project, to be currently occupied by the British. So it makes no sense to not have the Canadians within an American Communist Party that, of course, eventually wants to conceive of America itself as a more Pan-American project. But our comrades in Ontario here cleaning garbage from what was called the garbage park, now hopefully no longer going by that name. ACP Pennsylvania cleaning Fisher Park and Olney neighborhood. ACP Washington doing something very similar. Here we have Kyle from Clearfield County, serving people, serving food. So it's not just cleaning garbage, it's serving people. Shout out to all of you in ACP who have gone out to serve your communities. It's very much appreciated by the people in those communities and by the party at large. This is the sort of work we need to do to win the American people. I mean, you can have all the right ideas. If you don't win the people, you have literally nothing. Here is Comrade Chris Halali, the International Secretary of the American Communist Party, with Comrade Mauricio Lautaro Sandino Montes. He's a Nicaraguan ambassador. And this post signifies the ACP signing of the Paris Declaration for the Great World Anti-Imperialist Platform, a coalition of excellent parties like PSOV and many others. So that's some ACP news. Let me go back to the chat. If anyone has any comments about ACP, any questions, please do send those over. I'd be happy to answer whatever you guys are willing to throw my way. Okay, so that's that. I wanted to show you all a video of Jorge Rodriguez. I believe that's his name, if I didn't forget. ACP Ontario represent. Shout out to you, Jay Bishop. Wanted to show a video from Jorge Rodriguez talking about the ONGs, the NGOs, and the work that they do in the service of empire to destabilize countries that exist outside of the sphere of influence of U.S. imperialism. This phrase is a little problematic. It's one that Lenin uses. The reality is that no country, even if they're outside, is fully outside of the sphere of influence. Venezuela, of course, is a country very much influenced by, for instance, the 930 sanctions that the American empire has placed on it. So it's outside in the sense of being sovereign, but not outside in the sense of being free from the influence of imperialism. Every country is, to a larger or smaller extent. Some are subject to that influence through having directly a puppet government, and others are subject to that influence by being subjected to imperialist hybrid wars that, of course, play an extremely influential role in their development and in stifling any sort of development. How do I become a member of the ACP? You sign up through acp.us. acp.us. The process looks something like you filling out a form. That form is sent to Kyle, who's the person that has been processing all of our members, and then you pick a time slot for your interview. And once you do your interview, you get told within a few days if you have been accepted or not. So that's you also have to download Telegram and send Kyle a message, but it's pretty easy to figure out. Okay, so this is compañero Jorge Rodriguez. I believe that's his name. I saw him over there, so I should have remembered. But anyways.
La ley que regula a las organizaciones no gubernamentales. Tiene que ser muy buena esa ley para que un personaje como Brian Nichols haya salido el día de hoy, haya ocupado algo de su tan valioso tiempo, el señor subsecretario para Asuntos del Hemisferio del Departamento de Estado de los Estados Unidos de América, para criticar la ley de regulación de las ONG. ¿Por qué la critican? Porque es a través de unas fachadas que ellos llaman ONG, de unas organizaciones que dependen completamente de la Agencia Central de Inteligencia de los Estados Unidos y del Departamento de Estado, con la que ellos financian todas las acciones de desestabilización y de violencia en contra del pueblo de Venezuela. Estos comanditos de la violencia, del odio, del extremismo, que se activaron para matar, para destruir, para quemar, fueron financiados en su totalidad bajo la fachada de supuestas ONG, que cuando se va a ver quién la financia, o la financian organismos de dudosa procedencia de Europa, o la financia la Agencia de los Estados Unidos para el Desarrollo llamada USAID.
This is an area that it's indispensable for understanding how contemporary imperialism functions. What he's saying there is that you have this individual in the opposition, Brian Nichols, who has been criticizing the NGO law that Venezuela has to prevent what the comrades from the Revolution Report, by the way, shout out to Slava. We gave baskets with homemade canned goods to all our neighbors at the block party. Excellent work. What the comrades from the Revolution Report called the Color Revolution Doctrine. And there's an excellent documentary on using Georgia as a case study that Comrade Donald Corder did, that you should all of you should watch, because it goes through systematically how it is that these NGOs are an essential component of the Color Revolution doctrine. And of course, when you prevent your country from being influenced by foreign forces that do not have the interest of the people at heart, that seek nothing else but to come in and loot and super exploit your people, when you prevent those interests from coming in, what does the treasonous opposition do? It says you're anti-democratic. You're anti-democratic. What does that mean? What's democracy then? For these people, democracy is nothing more than the ability of big imperialist capital to come into your country and loot it freely. That's what democracy means for them. Democracy is not demos and kratos. It's not common people in power. That's not democracy. That's not democracy. Democracy for them in this context isn't even one person, one vote, because they have no respect at all whatsoever for the electoral result, which indubitably showed that Maduro won by a very wide margin in one of the most democratic electoral systems on the planet. So what is democracy for them? Democracy is the ability of the capitalist class to do whatever it wants. Democracy for them is intimately tied to the freedom of capital. And it's the freedom of capital to do what? Is it the freedom of capital to improve people's lives? Is it the freedom of capital to not destroy the? It's the freedom of capital to exploit, the freedom of capital to indebt, to chain people to debts that they'll never be able to pay off, that end up functioning as a form of debt slavery. It's the freedom of capital to accumulate. That's the name of the game. The name of the game is to have bankers who produce nothing, who are parasites on society, to be able to see those little numbers on their computer go up and up and up and up and up. That's the freedom they care about. They want the freedom of American corporations to go into Venezuela and loot its oil. The country has the most oil reserves on the whole planet. That's what they consider to be freedom. That's what they consider to be democratic. It's literally turning what democracy is on its head. It's not even formal democracy at this point. The communists used to call bourgeois democracy a form of formal democracy. You have the appearance of democracy, but in substance, you have an absolutism that is a little different, really, from feudal absolutisms. But even the formal character of this democracy cannot even be said to be there anymore in opposition pro-bourgeois forces like those that are in Venezuela, because they quite literally, without any evidence, reject electoral results. They had the opportunity to bring their ballots to the Supreme Court, and they didn't. Why is that, you ask? Well, as was showed when Jackson was still in Venezuela at a press conference where he got to interview Nicolás Maduro, most of the ballots that they had were bullshit. They either didn't have signatures, which Venezuelan ballots require, or they were torn up in various areas, which you cannot have, or they had literally the same signature over and over and over again. So it was pure electoral fraud that they were trying to commit. This is how they turn the world on its head. These are the people that have been saying for months that there's going to be electoral fraud. Yeah, there's going to be attempts at electoral fraud by you, by the people who keep on lambasting Maduro and the Venezuelan revolution for not being democratic. It's you. It's just pure projection. They're the ones that have made it so that Venezuela has to have one of the strictest electoral systems ever to prevent corruption, to prevent electoral fraud, because these people, because they cannot win the Venezuelan people, the only thing they have left is fraud. The only thing they have left is fraud. And the reason why they didn't show up to the Supreme Court is because if they would have shown their ballots, they would have gotten arrested, because that's electoral fraud. So guys, like, think critically about this. They had the capacity to go to the neutral Supreme Court, and if they had any case on their side that Maduro was actually cheating and that they actually won, they would have shown up and shown you the proof. They would have shown you the proof. But where's the proof? The slightest bit of digging shows that all of their ballots are bullshit. That's how stupid they think people are. Anyone can go in and check the ballots that they have there and see how faulty the vast majority of them are. Thousands and thousands of ballots that are pure bullshit. That's how stupid they think they are. They offend the intelligence of even the regular member of the opposition. These people are blinded. They're completely blinded. They turn the world on its head in order to, ex post facto, after the fact, defend the position that they assumed from the get-go to be correct. It's absolute bullshit. And the comments from Lula and Petro, I mean, they've been saying good things about Palestine, but in their region, they're extremely soft and oftentimes in bed with the imperialists. I don't know what else to say. Venezuela is a critical nodal point in the transition into this new multipolar world. When Maduro won the elections, it wasn't just Venezuelans who celebrated, it was the multipolar world all over. It was all over. And I was there with delegates from all over the world, leaders from all over the world, progressive parties, parties in power. Everyone celebrated when Maduro won because they understood it was a loss for the American empire. It was a win for the forces of progress. So if you claim to be a progressive, as Lula and Pedro do, if you claim to side with the working class and oppressed groups, oppressed nationalities, how the hell are you going to be peddling imperialist propaganda about electoral processes for whose conclusion there is so much evidence to the contrary of what you're saying? The Chavistas have the evidence. They showed it in the Supreme Court. You know who doesn't have the evidence? The opposition. So how are you going to give any weight to the claims of the opposition as if this was the first time? As if this isn't the case literally every fucking election in Venezuela. Every single time it's the same playbook. How stupid can you be to see something play itself out literally every 2 to 4 years and then somehow still be surprised by it? What level of imbecility do you need to have to still be surprised by how the opposition has acted? This is how they've acted every election. Months ahead of time, they claim fraud. The election comes around, they try to do electoral fraud. And when they lose overwhelmingly, they'll show their own statistics saying that they win. And because they're backed up and basically just puppeteered by the American empire, whom they actually represent, they don't represent any sector of the Venezuelan people. They represent the American empire that wants to go back into Venezuela and loot. They get their falsity, they get their invented reality completely boosted by American imperialist megaphones. And then all of the puppet states that do nothing but uphold the interests of American empires, they just end up claiming that the opposition won. It's literally the same playbook every time there's an election, and there's idiots that are still falling for it and have the audacity to call themselves progressive, to call themselves socialists, to call themselves communists. What level of imbecility do you need to have to not realize that it's been the same playbook over and over and over again? What, now because there's a Trotskyite split from the actual Venezuelan Communist Party that continues to call itself communist and that now has joined with the forces of reaction, attacking the Maduro government, siding with the Zionist pro-genocide opposition? Now that you have essentially imperialist and Zionist politics with a communist veneer, now you're going to support it. Is that the limit of your critical thinking? Whatever sticker, whatever logo the party has, that's when, that's the limit of your thinking? Not everything that calls itself communist is. We had an entity here in the US called the Communist Party USA. It was communist for a while. It stopped being that. In Venezuela, there was an entity called the Communist Party of Venezuela. It was communist for quite a while. And then, like the CPUSA, got taken over by a Trotskyite, ultra-leftist clique of people that have completely betrayed the Bolivarian revolutionary process, that have betrayed Chavismo under the auspices of defending it, which is how all of these treasonous party leaders always act. It is how they always act. It's how the CPUSA leadership right now acts. They're literally supporting fascism and genocide through claiming that they're fighting against fascism. The Communist Party in Venezuela claims they're defending Chavismo through literally being the bitches of empire. At one of the most critical conjunctures in the transition into this new multipolar world. Just like the CPUSA, it's no longer the real Communist Party. The PCV over there, the Communist Party of Venezuela, is no longer the real Communist Party. And because legally it broke all of its constitutional procedures, the Supreme Court had the legal right, the constitutional right, to sustain the legal ownership of the party and those that were actually committed to the Chavista process, and those actors that were not selling off their homeland for God knows what reason, and siding with the murderous, criminal, thuggish opposition. That's a law that if we had here in the US, the current leadership of CPUSA wouldn't be in place, because they violated the Constitution in order to sustain the status quo of supporting the Democrats. In Venezuela, that's not the case. In Venezuela, when a party violates its own constitution, the Supreme Court can step in and say, no longer. The problem is that the PCV still controls the social media of the party. So when we see PCV online, what we're seeing are the people that are no longer the PCV. The real PCV, the legal entity of the Communist Party of Venezuela, is still, the rank and file is still with the Chavista process. When I was in the closing of campaign rally in Venezuela, to the left of me were hundreds of people with the flag of the Communist Party of Venezuela. Those are the real Communist Party of Venezuela. The problem is that our perception is affected by those that were kicked out because they broke with their own constitution and betrayed the Chavista revolution. And those people are the ones that still have control over the social medias. But the real communists in Venezuela, those in the real PCV, are with the Bolivarian revolution. They're with Maduro. So how are you going to claim to be a progressive? How are you going to claim to be a leftist of any sort, pro-labor, as Petro and Lula claim to be, and then turn around and peddle the lies of empire about Venezuela, objectively siding with U.S. imperialism? We have to call it for what it is. They're siding with U.S. imperialism on this question. Yes, there's other questions where they're good on Palestine and some other issues, but they're peddling the lies of U.S. imperialism, the Zionist, thuggish, criminal opposition, which has burned people alive in the streets, which has killed people, innocent people killed, to defend a project that seeks to recolonize Venezuela. How are you going to side with that and then claim to be some leftist, some progressive? It's bullshit. They are the dogs of empire when they do that. They are the dogs of empire when they do that. If Palestine is a critical conjuncture, and I would say the most critical conjuncture, the most critical nodal point in this transition into a new multipolar world, Venezuela is up there as one of the most critical points where the battle for a new world is being waged. And if you don't have the cojones, if you don't have the courage to stand on the right side when it matters, if you peddle the lies of empire and the ancien regime when it matters and in your region, you are no progressive. You are no leftist. In that issue, at least, you are reactionary. And overall, taken up comprehensively, you are no one. You are not someone that is to be trusted. You're inconsistent. You claim to stand against empire over here, and then you stand with it over here. That's inconsistent. You can't trust people that are like that. You cannot trust people that are inconsistent. Great question, Daniel. And look at this, man. These are the people that groups like the PCV and other people who continue to call themselves Marxist-Leninists, I don't know how, with what face, that continue to call themselves Marxist-Leninists in the U.S. These are the people that they're siding with when they side with the opposition. The same fucking opposition that claims that Maduro's doing a genocide against them, when their fucking idiot leaders continue to walk the streets freely. If there's something we could criticize the Maduro government for, is not being harsh enough with the opposition. A lot of the opposition, it just lets them run around. Do you think it was for someone like Edmundo or Maria Corina Machado to be able to run, these people should be in prison. They're literally representing foreign interest in your election. Maria Corina Machado called for the Zionist genocidal entity to invade Venezuela. Can you imagine that? China's committing no genocide. But what if a serious political party with a significant base in the US was calling for China to invade America to liberate it? What would be done to the leader of that political party here? That's called treason. It has a fucking name. In some countries, it means it means what I'm sure you guys know it means. In other countries, it means imprisonment. For some fucking reason, in Venezuela, these people can continue walking freely. They're literally bought out by American imperialism, and they walk freely in the streets and can run presidential campaigns. And these fucking imbeciles in the opposition have the audacity to talk about Maduro carrying out a genocide and being a fucking dictator. Is that how dictators behave? Do dictators allow this other idiot, Juan Guaido, to roam around the streets of Venezuela freely? Do dictators send in the police to protect them when the barrios, when the popular neighborhoods want to fucking beat the shit out of Juan Guaido because they know he's a fucking rat? Is that the way dictators behave? Is that the way dictators behave? Of course not. If we had even a little bit of common sense, we would know that this is bullshit. The same people criticizing the Maduro government are the people waving the flag of an ethno-state, carrying out a genocide, killing hundreds of thousands of people, half of whom are babies and kids. There's no moral weight behind any of their claims. It's absolute bullshit. Thank you so much, L, for the $10 super chat. Che said political sovereignty is the instrument for the conquest of the economy and for making national sovereignty a reality in its broadest sense. Absolutely. You can't have real sovereignty. Your sovereignty is reduced to flag sovereignty, to what's called flag democracy. You can't have real sovereignty if the resources of your people are controlled by foreign entities. If your people do not have control over their own resources, over their own destiny, you do not have sovereignty. You're not a sovereign entity if other forces control the resources in the land below you. If other entities control the destiny of your economic policy, of your social policy, of your politics, you are not sovereign. And that's why what the opposition was fighting for was not just, a more neoliberalized economic policy. No. What they were fighting for was the recolonization of Venezuela. Plain and fucking simple. What was on the ballot was sovereignty, and sovereignty won. Thank you so much, Poppers, for the $5 super chat. I feel like a huge problem is computer literacy and being able to trace sources. Have you thought of doing a stream about research/tactics? I haven't thought of it, but that's a great idea. I feel like that might be an area that Eddie might be well suited for. So I'll definitely let him know that that's something we should be doing. Thank you so much, Poppers, for the $5 super chat. Thank you, Jonathan Foster, for the $5 super chat. What does it mean for ACP to sign the World Anti-Imperialist Platform Paris Declaration? Just a text from Paris 2022 or a declaration since as well? Is there a 2024 update? Yes, it means aligning oneself and joining. We're officially a part of the World Anti-Imperialist Platform. If you see all the member parties, we are amongst those now, that means that we have fraternal relations with all the other parties in that broad anti-imperialist organization. And yes, of course, it means not just signing the original Paris Declaration, but also aligning themselves with all the other ones that have since came about. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about my article before I get to the question of censorship and the American elections. Thank you so much, El Jimenez, for the $5 super chat. Our neighboring countries around Venezuela pressured to militarize. Our neighboring countries around Venezuela pressured to militarize by the United States. Well, historically, of course, Colombia, which shares a border with Venezuela, has been even called the Israel of the Americas. It's been a country that had, before Petro, had always been governed by anywhere from far to far right government, very militarized government, a lot of gang activity and violence. And, Petro has started doing some progressive things to roll that sort of stuff back, but clearly not enough. And the U.S. empire has, of course, militarized all of those regions. Take, for instance, the Contra Wars and how they, of course, funded the Contras in order to destabilize and overthrow the Nicaraguan government. A lot of these forces were not just coming out of Nicaragua, they're coming out of Honduras and other countries in Central America. So the same has been done not just in South America, but around the world. You destabilize people's. Look at the Uyghurs. A lot of the terrorism issue that led to some of the re-educational programs that China has done are rooted in the decades-long funding of the East Turkestan movement. I believe that's what it's called, an extremist group that has been funded since the 1980s in order to combat the Soviet Union at the time, and then kept around because they understood that it could play a similar role against China. So you fund extremist militarized groups on the borders of the countries that you seek to destabilize, because obviously they could do what, for instance, they tried to do to Jackson in Venezuela, which is kidnap him. Jackson, there was 2 truckloads of Colombian gangsters that showed up at his hotel to try to kidnap him. In my hotel, there was, of course, a spy, and in other hotels from other delegates, there were bombs planted. A lot of these activities are done by Colombian gangs in cahoots with the opposition. So, yes, militarizing the neighbors of anti-imperialist or socialist states is, of course, essential. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about my recent article called Environmental Neo-Malthusianism and the Communist Alternative. By the way, shout out to John Jackman for this amazing AI picture, which captures the sort of future we seek to build. One that is technologically advanced, but also green, sustainable development, sustainable abundance. That's the sort of future communists can provide. And look, guys, one of the central tenets, let me see if I can figure this out, make it bigger. Is that better? One of the central components of the Marxist analysis of capitalism, you get this, for instance, by the way, shout out, thank you, Cobb fan, for the $5 Australian super chat. Thank you so much, comrade. Yes, a country under U.S. imperialist control, absolutely. Fucking Kyle. Kyle has a coal fetish, by the way. It's important people know that. One of the central points that Marxism makes, and Marx and Engels make this very clearly in the Manifesto of the Communist Party, They say that capitalism accomplished wonders far surpassing Egyptian pyramids, Roman aqueducts, and Gothic cathedrals. So capitalism comes in and is a actual is an actual progressive force because it develops the forces of production. And the development of the forces of production creates the conditions for the possibility of more socially available free time. If you have more developed forces of production, that means that it potentially, in a rational society, takes less labor to perform the tasks that meet human needs and an ever-growing amount of human needs. So if you have developed forces of production, you can potentially have more free time where people could just do creative enterprises. It's what various scholars have called socially available free time. So Marx and Engels saw that at a certain stage in history, capitalism, of course, played a progressive role. It overthrew feudal absolutisms and hierarchies, and it developed the productive forces unlike ever before in human history. But what has happened? What has happened? There's this little thing that Marx describes in the third volume of Capital and also in the theories of surplus value, which is the crisis-prone character of capitalist production. This is something that it's not just us Marxists who state it as a central component of the capitalist mode of life. I mean, bourgeois economists themselves accept that every 8 to 10 years we live in a system that just goes kaboom, crashes every 8 to 10 years. These crashes are rooted in what Marx called the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. And one of the things that we find, specifically in the West and in the US, is that in 1970, there's this massive crisis rooted in the fact that when you look at the long term, the rates of profit were completely plummeting. They were plummeting. And as a capitalist, what do you need to do? The name of the game, what makes capital capital itself, is accumulation. You need to accumulate more and more and more. If you just if you make loads of money and you keep it and you hoard it for yourself and you consume it or you keep it locked up in a safe, it's not capital. It becomes capital when it enters into this relationship of accumulation. So when you have a tendency of the rate of profit to fall, that makes accumulation difficult. It makes accumulation very, very difficult. So you have in the 1970s 2 to 3 routes that you could take. You can either do what you did in the Second World War, which is involve the government in the process of the economy and force economic development through the government, through government intervention, which would mean leaning more and more towards a form of socialistic society, even if it's controlled by capitalists, which is something that we see some countries do today in the multipolar orbit. It might be ran by capitalist forces, but because they're nationalist and patriotic and to a certain extent anti-imperialist, they have been able to put forth platforms where the government intervenes in order to develop the forces of production, to have real economic productive growth. So you have that one side, and then you have this other side with 2 options. You have the side where you turn more towards socialism, or you have the side where you try to give capitalism a lifeline. And you do that in 2 methods. You go through financialization and seeking profits, not from reinvesting capital into productive capital, but from using what capital you have to invest in things like the stock market, in things that derive profit from interest rates or from rents. So nothing productive, nothing that requires producing something new, developing the forces of production. Everything purely parasitic. Rents, interest rates, and stock buybacks. Or if you want to sustain productive industry, you go to other countries where you can buy labor power, what Marx calls variable capital, cheaper. And so you save on the cost of production and you increase the rate of profit in that form. As we should know, the American capitalist class did both. They exported productive capital abroad, that Rust Belt that you see all over the heartland of America, where you see literally the ruins of what were once factories that provided stable living conditions for working people. That's rooted in the fact that in order to sustain profit levels that deemed it worthy to continue growth, the capitalist class had to go abroad and take the factories, take the enterprises abroad to other countries in the global south, where they could pay workers, pennies on the dollar of what American workers would have made. And that way increase the rate of profit again. Or take the route of financialization. Today, all economists speak about financialization, as we should. It's a central part of the American economy. But what's always forgotten is that this turn towards financialization didn't just come out of the whims of the American capitalist class and the government that it has completely bought off and controls. It wasn't just something arbitrary. It's a necessary development of the logic of capital's development. It is rooted, as I mentioned, in the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. It's the only lifeline, along with exporting productive capital, that allowed capitalism to survive. And what we find today, as Michael Hudson has shown in his work, 92% of the profits of the Fortune 500 companies have been used to buy stocks, their own stock buyback programs, or to pay out dividends. Only 8% is used on new investments. And a lot of those new investments are also unproductive in character. So what we have found in the capitalist economy in the US and specifically the West is a complete process of deindustrialization. None of the economies and their growth are based on any actual real growth. So what does that do? What does that do to capitalist ideology? Can it sustain the sort of Promethean attitude of growth that it once had in the 20th century and in the 19th century, where it posited itself as the force that could bring about innovation, as the force that can bring about growth? Can it continue to do that when it quite literally can no longer grow anymore unless it's through these incredibly parasitic means, fully financialized, that have nothing to do with real economic growth, or through growing in other countries where even there the rate of profit is falling? Because in a lot of those, take China for instance, the wages of Chinese workers has continued to go up because it's ran by a communist state that had all along the interest of its people, of its working class at heart. So what has to be the new ideology of the capitalist class if it can all fall back on this Promethean superiority of its ability to grow? It has to be a form of environmental neo-Malthusianism. It has to fall back on old Malthusian ideas that there's a discrepancy between population and productive growth and the resources of the environment. That's the new environmentalist part. It has to develop ideas like environmental overshoots and overshooting the capacities of the environment. And it has to blame growth itself. It can't grow anymore, any real economy, so it blames growth itself. And it's faced with this environmental catastrophe that it has created that wasn't created by growth. It was created by capitalist growth, by growth that is particularly situated in a specific mode of production, at a specific stage of history, at a specific geographical location of the planet. It blames the effects of its particular form of growth on growth itself. And the ideology that you get is the one that you get with the WEF, with the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab sort of environmental neo-Malthusianism, which is telling the people you'll own nothing and be happy. You'll eat crickets and you'll eat insects and you'll be happy. You'll live in a little hut without electricity and you'll be happy. That has to be the ideology of a capitalism that quite literally cannot grow That has to be their ideology today, especially when, in the face of its own impotence to grow in any serious sense the real economy, the global south, spearheaded by China and Russia, has been able to develop at speeds that far outpace the West and the US. China's productive economy grows twice as fast as the US's. So, when you're in a world where you can't grow the real economy, but your enemies, the enemies of Western capitalist imperialist hegemony, are actually doing it, the ideology that you need in order to try to legitimize yourself has to turn towards condemning growth itself. You have to put on imperialist ideology an environmentalist garb. Eco-imperialism. You have to condemn the growth of the global south attempting to develop its productive forces and lift its people up from poverty. You have to condemn that through an environmentalist veneer, especially when you yourself can no longer reproduce the same levels of growth as before. When you have a country that is collapsing, that the people see it collapsing, and you have no alternative for them. No alternative. But what ends up happening? Is it enough for just Klaus Schwab to tell us you'll own nothing and be happy? Is that enough? No. Bourgeois ideology, ever since the capitalist mode of life became no longer progressive, which George Lukács traces to 1848 and its reaction to the uprising of these progressive, usually working class-led revolutions. Ever since 1848, the defense of capitalism has had to take primarily the form of indirect apologetics. Before that, when you're a progressive force, you wear it on your chest. You have the ideology of the Enlightenment, the progressive Enlightenment, which we communists take up. You say, I believe in reason, I believe in progress, I believe in humanity. And this is the system that is, creating conditions far more rational than the irrationality of feudalism. This is condition that is actually producing progress. Look at all of these things that we have made. And this is the system that is actually benefiting humanity. That's the ideology of the progressive bourgeoisie. It culminates, of course, in the tradition of German idealism, and specifically the figures of Kant, which is pre-German idealism, and Hegel. Hegel is the culmination point of the progressive bourgeoisie. What you have in 1848 is this turn away from that. Capitalism can no longer defend itself explicitly. Now defense has to be a little bit more sinister. Now it has to take the form of indirect apologetics. And you have a turn from Hegel to Schopenhauer, from optimism, faith in reason, faith in progress, to complete pessimism. That turn towards Schopenhauer gets intensified in the philosophy of Nietzsche, in the philosophy of Edward von Hartmann, in some of the phenomenologists and the vitalists at the beginning of the 20th century, in some of the existentialists, for Lukács and some of the pragmatists as well. And what you end up finding is that you have this fundamental turn towards irrationalism, the rejection of reason. Because if you're faithful to reason itself, there's no way that you could see the world around us and say this is rational. If you're faithful to reason, you end up in the camp of socialism. You have to. So, faced with this dilemma, capitalist ideology has to turn towards irrationality. And in terms of defending the system, what's most effective ends up now becoming indirect apologetics. It's the people who criticize the system in such a superficial, ahistorical, or transhistorical, culturalist, and abstract form, who in the very act of criticizing it, reinforce it. Those are the people that you need. Those are precisely the people that you need. This is what Western Marxism does. Western Marxism as a whole tradition is premised on condemning socialism because it doesn't live up to the pure ideals of socialism in their head. The most common phrase is, oh, that's not real socialism. But all of them reaffirm in that empty abstract negativity the same system that they claim to be against by positing themselves as Marxist. And what's a common thread of all of the Western Marxists? An extremely culturalist understanding of capitalism. Political economy and the analysis of the productive forces is tossed out the window. In a lot of them, you have a very pessimistic and ahistorical understanding of the unfolding of events. Take someone like Marcuse, who by the 1860s, a strong period of turmoil, anti-colonial revolutions all over the world, he goes on to posit a pessimistic theory that socialism is basically impossible, that the working class has been completely subsumed within the apparatuses of capital. So ahistorical, precisely in the sense that they're unable to see that whatever stability was produced by the middle class was not a permanent phenomenon, but something transient and that was bound to change and recreate these conditions for reproletarianization that Noah has described in his work. Ahistorical and pessimistic. So the full acceptance of irrationalism, a superficial culturalist, transhistorical critique of capitalism, but a fundamental attitude that nothing can change. It's what Ketty Truecroft described as the radicalization of the impossibility of an exit. You radicalize and you make it appear as radical the inability to leave the current state of affairs. These are the post-colonialists. These are the postmodernists. These are the post-humanists. These are all of these different post and post-Marxists, all of these different tendencies that arise out of the academy that are promoted as radical. But in reality, what they are is controlled forms of counter-hegemony. That's what I've called them, controlled forms of counter-hegemony. In these moments of crisis when people dissent, they're the ones that the ruling elite wants people to go to because they don't substantially oppose empire. They don't substantially oppose the existing order. They perform an indirect apologetics of it. Thank you so much, Edwin Gonzalez, for the $20 super chat. Thank you so much, brother. And thank you, Got Your Matao, for the 5 Midwestern Marx memberships. Thank you so much, comrade. So to get back to the point on environmentalism, is it enough just to have these sleazy capitalists like Klaus Schwab tell us that we'll own nothing and be happy? Is that enough to succeed and legitimize the dwindling, parasitic state of affairs that capitalism is in? No, it's not. You need some form of indirect apologetics. You need a way of criticizing the system that is so superficial, so abstract, so disconnected from any substantive critique of the system and understanding of it, that it actually reinforces that which it claims to critique and be against. And so what do we get? We get degrowth communism. We get Koei Saito, who's now the hottest commodity, the hottest intellectual commodity in the radical academy. Radical. We get people like Jason Hickel and many, many others who paint on the basis of reified, disconnected quotes they take from random Marx manuscripts, who distort and create a caricature of Marx and Engels, turning them into something that is unrecognizable in order to legitimize what the current ideology of empire needs today, which is the condemning of economic growth and development. It might present itself as very radical. Oh, wow, degrowth communism. Wow, it has the word communism in it. Is it actually communism? No, it's not. what every single leader of anti-imperialist struggles in the 20th and 21st century have emphasized, from Sun Yat-sen to Nehru in India, to Mao, to Deng, to Che Guevara, to Fidel Castro, to Amilcar Cabral, what all of them have emphasized in the tricontinental, in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, what all of them have emphasized is the importance, the essential role of the development of the productive forces, of the sciences, of technologies, of agriculture. In China, it's called the Four Modernizations, which were developed by Zhao Enlai. You modernize agriculture, the forces of production, science, technology, your defense system. And why do you do that? You do it to bridge the global inequality that has been created between the imperialist countries and the colonized or imperialized countries, for whom central to that imperialist dynamic is keeping them poor. Keeping them poor. Let me read to you a quote from Amilcar Cabral, who echoes Lenin when he tells us, quote, "We have seen that violent usurpation of the freedom of the process of development of the forces of production, dominated socio-economic whole, constitutes the principal and permanent characteristic of imperialist domination, whatever its form." So central to imperialist domination is the complete fettering, the castrating of the ability of countries to develop their forces of production. This is one of the areas where the younger Marx, the later Marx corrects, but the younger Marx was incorrect. The younger Marx thought wrongly that the spread of capitalism was kind of progressive because it brought the conditions that created the proletariat in these countries, and it brought with it the development of the forces of production. What we have found with Lenin, already with Lenin, is that what imperialism does is the opposite. It keeps these areas poor. It makes them even poorer than before, while looting all of that wealth into the imperial centers. So, to endorse something like degrowth communism is to endorse an ideology that seeks to legitimize in a new woke, eco-washed or greenwashed form an ideology that seeks to tell the global south, currently developing and creating the institutions to develop further through BRICS. It's an ideology that tells them, don't grow. You are wrong to grow because your growth is damaging the environment. And it's absolutely bullshit. The environmental crisis that we have is rooted in the capitalist system. It's not rooted in growth itself. It's not rooted in what the global south has done to try to develop the productive forces. It's rooted in the capitalist system, which thinks of nothing, not humans, not human well-being, not environmental well-being. All it thinks about is profit, profit, profit. If it can obtain profit and the accumulation of capital, it doesn't matter whether it's at the expense of people, whether it's at the expense of kids, nature, it doesn't matter. What matters is profit. But communism, which creates the conditions for a planned and rational metabolism, as Marx said, with nature, yes, it posits fundamentally the need for growth. Communists, to realize our ideal society, we need abundance. We want abundance. We don't want wastefulness. We don't endorse the sort of cheap productivism that capitalism has, where we have literally what William Morris called a system of waste. We don't endorse that wastefulness. That's inefficient. We want productiveness, efficiency, and abundance. We can have abundance and be efficient. Repeat, we can have abundance and be efficient because we can have sustainability while developing. We can have a sustainable development premised on, as Marx writes in the third volume of Capital, a rational metabolism with nature. It means, yes, we have growth, but because growth is centered not on this abstract conception of capital accumulation, but on actually improving people's lives, on creating the sort of conditions that have the material security for people guaranteed such that everyone can live fulfilling and flourishing lives, within that calculus, of course, nature is present because it's the premise upon which everything else is based on. You can't have successful, flourishing lives if you don't have clean rivers, if your air is dirty, contaminated, and you die 20 years beforehand because of air pollution. But the only way that you can have that growth that we need, that improves the lives of people and avoid the wastefulness and the economic side effects of anarchic capitalist growth, is through communism. It's a rethinking of growth from capital-centered to human-centered. And this is what we've seen in China. Let me read to you a quote from Xi Jinping. He says, China will stay committed to promoting ecological conservation. As I had said many times, we should never grow the economy at the cost of resource depletion and environmental degradation, which is like draining a pond to get fish. Nor, this is important, nor should we sacrifice growth to protect the environment, which is like climbing a tree to catch fish. Guided by our philosophy that clean waters and green mountains are just as valuable as gold and silver, China has carried out holistic conservation and systematic governance of its mountains, rivers, forests, farmlands, lakes, grasslands, and deserts. What does that mean, folks? It means you literally have that unity of opposites. Yes, we want to protect the environment. We want to protect the environment, but we also need to grow. And the only way to do that is if you're not guided by this anarchic logic of capital accumulation, but by a rational logic that plans economic development on the basis of serving human needs, creating abundance without creating waste. And that's what China's doing. China has planted, it's reforested and forested for the first time ever desert areas as large as Ireland in order to undo some of the other stuff that its productive economy does. It's one of the areas of the world that has the highest density of electric cars. We're not even allowed to buy cars, Chinese cars here in the US because of how good they are. They're better than the cars from here and they're cheaper. What would that do to the American market, to the European market? So China has figured it out. Sustainable growth. That's the communist, the Marxist position. You overcome the wastefulness of capitalism, but you still grow in order to create the conditions for better lives for people and for more socially available free time. Create abundance, but you do it sustainably. So why the fuck are there people talking about degrowth communism? Specifically, in the context of a US that has been plagued by McCarthyism, central to which is the idea that communism brings poverty. If you go around telling people you're a degrowth communist and you want to degrow the economy, they're going to kick you the fuck out. No one wants less development. That, for that, just continue with capitalism, because that's what capitalism is producing. It's producing degrowth. The American economy is degrowing. Real economy is shrinking. It's collapsing. Fake economies is growing, but real economy is collapsing. If you want degrowth, just be a capitalist. Just be in favor of the US. How do you have the audacity to call yourself a Marxist, a communist, and uphold such a preposterous position in the context of the US? All you're doing is literally accepting, like the national nihilists do, the narrative of McCarthyism. McCarthyism tells the people socialism brings poverty, and you then show up at their doorstep and say, I want to degrow the economy. I want you to have less. I want you to have less. It's preposterous. Communists should be the people that say, especially in the US, Capitalism has stifled our ability to develop. You want reindustrialization, you want new cities, you want fix the crumbling cities that we have. You want better technological innovation, better technologies, better resources, better infrastructure. The communists are the people that can do that. The communists are the people that can grow and do so in a way that is environmentally sustainable. That should be our position. We're the people that can actually grow the economy in a real sense, the real economy. That's what communists should be doing. Not promoting some bullshit degrowth. That's what our position should be. Thank you so much, L, for the 20 Midwestern Marx memberships. Thank you, comrade. So reject this bullshit degrowth ideology, which is nothing more than putting a radical veneer on environmental neo-Malthusianism, which is fundamentally the ideology of the ruling class today. As the capitalist class has found itself unable to grow, unable to keep up with the growth of China, Russia, and the BRICS and multipolar burgeoning world, it has condemned growth itself. And if you call yourself a communist, you cannot resort to accepting, even with a so-called radical veneer, this bullshit ideology of degrowth. We need more growth. We need more growth, but we need it with more efficiency, with less wastefulness, and in a way that rationally and in a planned manner takes into account human need as its basis and the environment as well. That engages in a rational metabolism with the environment. That's the real message of volume 3 of that passage from volume 3 of Capital, that these people disconnect in order to twist Marx into some degrowth lunatic. Marx is not saying you stop growth. Marx is saying you develop in a sustainable fashion. That's what China's doing, and that's where we should be learning from. Building an ecological socialist civilization, which is how China describes its project. Ecological socialist civilization. Growth, 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 but sustainable. That should be our position. Yeah, I think this was a mistake. The one-child policy was a mistake, but you have to make mistakes in order to eventually get it right. It's hard to get it right from the start. Okay, I have 2 more news I want to cover. The great Bassem Youssef, one of the most notable, if not the biggest, pro-Palestine, pro-humanity, pro-life voice on the internet, was just banned from Twitter. So that goes to show bourgeois hypocrisy, not just the hypocrisy of the American state, which claims to uphold free speech while supporting policies that crack down on the rights we are told we're guaranteed, but also the hypocrisy of the class for whom the current system actually benefits, which is people like Elon Musk. Elon Musk could not have accumulated the wealth that he has, the capital that he has, without defense contracts from the government. It's been the government and the most horrendous sectors, the military-industrial complex, that has propped up someone like Elon Musk, who has a facade of being pro-free speech, has the complete facade of being pro-free speech, buys up, just because he's rich, one of the most popular apps that is central to how it is that public discourse occurs, to the opinions that people have on ongoing political affairs, buys it up just on a whim, claims that he does it in order to protect free speech,
and then does things like this. Ban people. Why? Because he was sharing Nazi things? No, there's a million people sharing Nazi things on Twitter. They don't get banned. Why? Because he was sharing pornography? No, there's a million people sharing pornography on Twitter who don't get banned. Why? Because he was sharing gruesome, nasty, criminal videos that, disturb. No, there's a million people doing that don't get banned. Why was Bassem Youssef banned? Because he was a voice, a moral voice against the genocide of the Palestinians. Because he stood up and, as an American citizen, said, I do not understand how in the hell it is in the interest of the American people and American citizens to have our tax dollars go to killing babies. How is Israel America's best friend when this is what it's doing with our armaments and with our dollars? When it is bringing the world closer and closer to nuclear devastation and the Third World War? How is Israel America's best friend when, in part, because of what Israel's doing to the Palestinians, a big chunk of the world has turned against America? And that's not necessarily fully true. People have turned against America because of its own policies, and a lot of them recognize that what Israel does is obviously puppeteered by the US, not the other way around. But either way, we're dealing with someone who is extremely successful in criticizing Zionism, in exposing the truth, and in siding with the Palestinians. And they get banned. That's why they got banned. He didn't get banned for tweeting Nazi shit. He didn't get banned for tweeting out porn like a million other fucking people are doing on Twitter. He gets banned because he says the truth. He condemns the genocide in Palestine. And he does it in a way that the American people accept. Some of the most viral videos that have came out of the last 8 months of this genocide have been from Bassem Youssef. And now he's banned. So that tells you the hypocrisy of someone like Elon Musk, who claims to have bought Twitter, even though he lost money, to have bought Twitter for the sake of protecting free speech. Free for whom? To do what? That is the Leninist question. Free for whom? To do what? Clearly, the limits of free speech are themselves the limits of the acceptable discourse within the current ruling order. As soon as you break with the accepted narrative and do so in a form that you start to reach people, if you break with the accepted narrative and you're just some weirdo that no one listens to, they're going to leave you alone. As soon as we get better at spreading this message, that's when they'll start cracking down. And that's why they've cracked down on Bassem. He was not only challenging the ruling narrative, but doing it in a way that was successful at reaching people. So that's that. Let's see where we're at. All right, so to close off the night, let's watch something very cringy. Here is preacher AOC, who should be leading a coalition called Progressives for Genocide, because that's essentially what the fuck she's doing. So-called progressive backing a genocidal party. Let's listen to this very cringe attempt at sounding like a Southern preacher.
And I, for one, am tired of hearing about how a two-bit union buster thinks of himself as more of a patriot than the woman who fights every single day to lift working people out from under the boots of greed, trampling on our way of life. And I, for one, am tired about
This is, full 1984 This is so, it's such a mockery. It's a spectacle. It's so ridiculous. I don't even think there's words for it. It's literally disgustingly turning the world on its head. The fucking genocide is being carried out, supported, equipped, as of the last 8 months, by the fucking party and the administration that she has the gall to say is fighting against it. That's like getting up in an event to endorse Hitler in the middle of 1940 and saying, you know, this is the party that is fighting against the Holocaust of the Jews. What? Are you fucking serious? Are you serious? You know, this is, it's turning everything on its head. The literal party carrying out, funding, supporting, giving the thumbs up to genocide, which is what that little expression, Israel has a right to defend itself, means. It's actually, Israel has a right to commit genocide. That's what the real sentence is. The party that's actively doing that is now campaigning and is being campaigned for by so-called progressives as the party that is trying to prevent the genocide that it is actively funding, equipping, and supporting, and providing cover for in the international arena. This is how delusional American politics has gotten. This is, I mean, it's speechless. Speechless. It's literally as absurd as getting up there and saying, you know, Hitler's the guy that's actually going to stop this Holocaust of the Jews. What the fuck? She's literally the vice president. She's in the administration carrying out the genocide. How the fuck are you going to tell me that she's the one that's fighting against it? And then to add insult to injury, she does it in this disgustingly fake attempt at being a Southern preacher. Listen to it again, man.
Who fights of hearing about how a two-bit union buster thinks of himself as more of a patriot than the woman who fights every single day to lift working people out from under the boots of greed, trampling on our way of life.
It's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. Thank you so much, Cobb Fan, for the $5 super chat. As a species, it's time we live up to supposedly being a Homo sapiens. Yes, it's definitely time we live up to that. That's what socialism will bring about. That's why we have to defend reason, because none of this shit is rational. All of this stuff is fully irrational. Like, it literally does not make sense. It only makes sense if you have a distorted, twisted, upside down understanding of rationality that's reducible to just defending and being a bitch to US imperialism. That's the only way you can make sense of it. All of this is fully irrational. If you're committed to reason, you can't be in support of this. Okay. All right, folks. It's been a fun day, a fun night. I've been usually streaming earlier. I missed last Thursday where I wanted to stream because I was out on vacation. Much necessary. But I'm glad to be back. It's been fun. Thank you so much to all of those who were kind enough to donate. Thank you, Ruthless Criticism. Thank you, El Jimenez. Thank you, El. Thank you, Poppers. Thank you, Jonathan. El again. Thank you, Cobb Fan. Thank you, Gatu Matao. Thank you, Edwin. Thank you, Gatu Matao again. Thank you, El. Thank you, Cobb Fan. Folks, we are a people's-funded grassroots institute. So all of these donations are literally would keep the lights on. So thank you to all of you who were able to donate. make sure to share this. Share this with people who wouldn't have otherwise seen it. That's the only way we get the ideas out there. If you're interested in joining a party that's actually trying to fight the establishment, that's actually a dissident force, a real communist party, consider joining the American Communist Party, the ACP. You can join at acp.us. It's not hard to join, but join when you're ready. You got to be disciplined. You got to be willing to get your hands dirty and be with your communities and your workplaces and do actual work. We don't want people just sitting around and doing nothing. We need people who are willing to work. That's what a cadre organization is. It's not a mass organization. It's a cadre organization. Only the people disciplined enough and serious enough about the cause will be in there. So if you think you have what it takes, consider applying at acp.us. If you would like to educate yourself on the history of philosophy, and as Lenin said, drink from the fountain of knowledge that humanity has provided us, consider signing up for just $5 a week for 8 weeks to my history of philosophy, Western philosophy class. It's just $5 a week. It's like buying me a coffee once a week for teaching you about the history of philosophy. So, and if you haven't already, make sure to buy a copy of my recent book. Oh man, that's too funny. If you haven't already, buy a copy of my recent book, Why We Need American Marxism, which you can get at midwesternmarx.com/books. And before we go, make sure, let me see, to sign up for the debate that Haas will be doing with Prax Ben. I don't think he's posted about it yet, but if you're in our Discord, make sure you sign up whenever it's made public that Haas is doing that debate with Prax Ben. Alrighty, folks, that's we'll wrap up there for today. Thank you to all of those who watched, and we'll see you this upcoming Thursday. Peace out.
Stand up, all victims of oppression, for the tyrants fear your might. Don't cling so hard to your possessions, for you have nothing if you have no right. Let racist ignorance be ended, for respect makes the empires fall. Freedom is merely privilege extended, unless enjoyed by one and all. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in the song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race. Let no one build walls to divide us, walls of hatred nor walls of stone. Come greet the dawn and stand beside us. We'll live together or we'll die alone. In our world poisoned by exploitation, those who have taken, now they must give. And end the vanity of nations, we've but one earth on which to live. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in the song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race. And so begins the final drama, in the streets and in the fields. Russian order unites the world in song. So called